Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this afternoon in this forum that we are hosting, the Lodging Forum Responding to COVID-19. We have three great panelists that will be sharing their opinion and knowledge about the hotel industry and the impact of COVID-19. Right now, we are still waiting for Ms. Julie Owens, so she will be joining us in a little bit. But we have Mr. Wes Rowe and John Ferris to join us here. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for taking the time to join us. My name is Marketa Kubickova. I'm associate professor here at the University of South Carolina. And together with me, I have two students from our restaurant and lodging association here, a new club that has been established at University of South Carolina. So Ms. Chaselyn Williams, she is the club president, and she will be moderating the session together with Bia Almeida, and she's actually joining us all the way from Brazil. So very excited. And she is the club secretary.
Yes.
Just to introduce our panelists a little bit more, let me tell you a little bit more about them. Georgia, can I have the next slides? Ms. Julie Owens, she will be joining us in a few minutes.
Hi, Mark. Here.
Oh, Julie, you're here. Excellent. Welcome. So Ms. Julie Owens started her career at Marriott Properties. And in August 2019, she became the hotel general manager at the Inn and Club at Harbour Town. We have Mr. Wes Rowe. Mr. Rowe is a UofSC alum, and he earned his master's degree here at the College of HRSM. He joined the Franklin Hotels team in 2013 that was sold and later became the 23rd Graduate Hotel. Mr. Rowe was involved with, he led the team during this transition and full renovation of the property. And now he is the general manager of the Graduate Hotel at Chapel Hill. And last but not least, we have Mr. John Ferris, the general manager of the Ritz-Carlton in Charlotte. Mr. Ferris launched his career at the Canadian Properties before joining the Ritz-Carlton in Atlanta. He also worked at the Ritz-Carlton in Orlando, and in 2019, he joined the Ritz-Carlton in Charlotte as an executive chef, where he played an instrumental role in achieving a 5-diamond rating. Later on, he moved to the Amelia Island Ritz-Carlton, and after 2016, he came back to Charlotte as the director of operation, and now he is the general manager of that property. So welcome all of you. Before we start asking questions and open for the forum for discussion, I would like to just point out that in November 10th, we are hosting our next forum at 4 p.m., which is the industry on the events industry responding to COVID-19. And we'll have two excellent guest speakers, Mr. Jason Outman, the Columbia, South Carolina, and Megan Shipley from CNP, from Carbelli Creative, New York. So Chaselyn and Bia, I give you the stage now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we have a few questions for you guys. Our first question is, what trends have you seen with guests' willingness to travel throughout this pandemic? Who would like to start?
I can start. Hi, I'm Julie here. And I just wanted to, being in Hilton Head, it's kind of interesting because it's very recreational. There's a lot of golf, tennis, biking, beach. It's a lot of outdoor activities. And at first in the spring, when restaurant dining had started, we had thought we were going to be really slow with really low occupancy and weren't really sure what to expect. But because of our location, we actually were selling out daily. So we had to actually pull back and limit the occupancy because we didn't have enough staff for the service. And just with the virus and the spike, we wanted to be socially responsible. So we had to limit our occupancy to 80%, and it is still limited as of right now. So it was kind of interesting with COVID. We were just as busy as we normally would have been until we capped the occupancy. And now for September and October, we're actually 70% more occupied than we were last year. But I think it's purely because of the weather and the activities that are available around Hilton Head.
Thank you. That's actually quite the opposite of what I thought it would have been, really.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, we know we saw the slowdown in the beginning. And really we started to see some ramp up, but our hotel, city property, business travelers, the beaches and mountains in our company have been the ones getting all the business for those who are still willing to travel. And I think the homeschooling or the people who are virtual have really led to an increased occupancy where they can work anywhere. Right? So the kids can get on their Zoom or their Canvas or whatever their programming is and still participate in class while the parents can enjoy vacation. It's interesting to see the travel change, right? Whether it's families or people who are commuting, but the business travel, I think we're still months away from seeing that return.
Yeah, and same thing, back in March, I think, we saw it kind of coming, down the pipeline. So Graduate Hotels actually decided to close all of their properties throughout the country back on March 20th. So we were closed all the way up until the middle of June, and then they slowly started reopening their properties. I think everybody was still trying to figure out what the fall was going to look like. Most of our properties are centered around university towns, university cities. So like the one there in Columbia. So everybody was kind of waiting to see what was going to happen with football, students coming back. We were very excited. We actually opened on the move-in day for UNC, and we were like, all right, here we go. And then UNC welcomed their students, and then 2 weeks later sent everybody home. So it was one of those moments where it was like, okay, what do we do now? So, we definitely did not see any transient business picking up. A lot of folks were canceling for, football plans. All of that just started kind of deteriorating. So we actually made a little pivot and decided to start opening up our hotel rooms for leases for some of the students who still wanted to stay in Chapel Hill and get that college experience. So we've been still running at, a little above 80% occupancy with those student leases thus far. So we plan to most likely do the same thing in the spring too.
Wow. Thank you. I think for university cities, there would definitely be a lot more occupancy, especially for like Columbia and everything. So our next question is, what steps do you take to ensure a guest feels safe while staying at your hotel?
So I'm sure this is probably similar across the board, but we've had to make a lot of changes, for our inn and everything. We suspended valet services. We have plexiglass on everything, on all of our front desks. We are limiting our food and beverage operation. We're still doing some food and beverage, just not 100%. Of course, masks are mandatory. Housekeeping has been had a big push with masks, and we've switched out all of our chemicals to the EPA approved lab ones that have been proven to kill the virus. Of course, a lot of limits with our pool. We had to remove 60% of our pool chairs because our space is a lot smaller. Same with our beach. Our gym is reservations only because it's one family at a time. The elevators, one family at a time. So there's a lot. It's actually a 24-page document we have on our website because we have guests calling all the time wondering, why should we stay with you? We're pre-making our guest keys, the day before so that they're untouched by the staff after they're sitting for a while. And that sums it up. Of course, the housekeeping we are still doing housekeeping service, which a lot of hotels aren't doing, but it's really strict. The guests can't be in the room. We're asking for a time to service the room upon check-in with the housekeepers wearing masks.
With all of these extra limitations and expectations put in place, have you had to hire more employees to make sure that that's a reality, or?
We really just gotten this current staff behind the new culture and the virus. I think that everybody is so happy to be back at work, because we did close for a month, or for 2 months, I'm sorry. And I think that everybody's so happy just to be back that they are willing to, just adhere to all of the protocols that we've put out. But we really haven't needed to hire more people. It's more just changing the mindset of the current staff.
I think we're similar from a protocol perspective. Marriott's launched a commitment to clean, which is worldwide. And it's the extra things. We've now allowed non-Marriott Bonvoy members to get a mobile key. So there's now an availability through the website for them to get a mobile key, which still secures payment, and some other things that sort of help us from a security and securing the financial part of the stay. But I think the biggest part is educating the ladies and gentlemen, right down to the housekeeper, because the guests will ask anybody they come in contact with about what we're doing. And if they can't explain it to the guest, then we're in trouble. Then they don't trust what we say is happening is actually happening, right? Because there's that, from a luxury perspective, we assume that a guest wants more interaction, which isn't always the case. And especially now, they want minimal interaction, so it's mobile key. They don't want housekeeping service. They don't even want to order room service. They either bring food or it's such a quick stay. We have limited F&B as well, but the guests who are still paying a significant rate, some of them don't care. They want the service, and it's educating them that there's some things that we can't do, like go in the guest room while they're in there to service it, and finding ways around making them more comfortable.
Yeah, along the same lines as just Julie and John. So we know, back in March, everything closed down, and we still have not opened our food and beverage operations. Our fitness centers are still closed down as well. Obviously with us having such a large population of students staying with us now too, that has presented its own challenges. They are still here trying to have the quote college experience. So they want to be around their friends and congregate. But here in Orange County, here in Chapel Hill, just up until about 2 weeks ago, we were still limited to only having groups of 10 or less. So it's been kind of hard to, hey, you got to still, you can't have 15 people in your room. You got to, still limit it to under 10. So we've been trying to do everything we can to mitigate those issues. But very similar too, we started a policy called Graduate Cares back in April. We partnered with Procter & Gamble and the Cleveland Clinic to come up with some ideas for the best products to use, the best practices for, what we should be coaching our team members on, what we should explain to guests when they first come in, and what we could share with them for as far as like what kind of expectations they should have throughout the hotel while they're staying with us.
Thank you. With that, Dr. K would like to know what aspects of your new policies or procedures will remain after COVID?
Now, I think it's going to be hard for us to stop doing what we've started. From an expectation of sanitation or cleanliness, or the guest expectation of delivery, that's not going to go away. And I think we're still going to have travelers who will insist on some of those protocols. There's some other Hilton has a sticker on the door that no one's entered the room since it's been cleaned by housekeeping. So there's some things that I think will be hard to get away from. We as a company didn't go that way because we felt it would be harder to take away that sticker in 6 months or a year or 2 years or 3 years. So I think it's really trying to find that balance of what the expectation is. How do we deliver it without compromising service, right? Because they still want valet, or they still want room service. They want all these things available. But that's going to be the toughest part, is how do we find that right balance? I think masks will eventually go away, but I think people will inherently have been adjusted to social distancing and standing 6 feet apart and doing some of those things naturally because we've been doing it for so long that will help. I think the hardest part is as we start to open up or the governor's orders change, we'll struggle with using it as a reason for why things don't exist. Gyms couldn't be open in North Carolina until guess it was September, with social distancing and every other piece of equipment and things, it was easier just to say that it wasn't allowed, and most people could understand it. But as we don't bring back services fast enough, when it's not because of a governor's orders or rules in a specific market, that's where the guest gets frustrated. And that's going to be the hardest comeback, is why isn't the club lounge open, or why don't we have this service when they're paying money, or they have an expectation, they're on vacation, that they don't want to put up with anything. They're paying good money, and that's what they want. So that's going to be the hardest balance, is those two things.
Yeah, I mean, I see the same exact thing with our hotel. It's really just going off of, what's current with everything that's going on in the world, and really what we need to do to make our guests and employees feel safe. So it's really hard to say what might stay or go, as this virus progresses, because every day it's something different.
Yep, agree. Yeah, I agree with both of you. Yeah, I think, the more knowledge we can continue to share with our guests for like what we're doing, what steps we're taking, I don't think that is ever going to end. They're going to want to know if what was done to my room, between the time the last guest left till the time I'm walking in. Did you all go in there and spray? Was there a 24-hour time span in between the last occupancy of the room? So I still think we're going to get those questions, probably for years to come. So.
Thank you. One second. So we have a question from the audience. Yes, go ahead, Bia.
Sorry. Sarah Macy asked, will the knowledge of if your employees have the COVID antibodies or the vaccine when we get one help encourage greater occupancy? That's a great question, Sarah. Thank you for asking.
I think that's a great question. I think it's a tough one, because I think, there's so many people who are asymptomatic that there is no real way of knowing without absolutely everybody being tested. Sometimes the tests aren't as accurate as we would like, I think, is what we're seeing in our market as well. And I think that's a bit scary. I don't think we'll get to a point where HIPAA violations will come into play, which would be sharing that sort of information. Although I think there may be a comfort level. I still don't think people understand, me wearing a mask is protecting somebody else. It's not protecting me. And I think that until everybody is on the same page, from how it's transmitted and how it's, how do we disinfect? How do we clean? What's long enough? Even the studies we've seen now, they were saying it would last on surfaces for 2 or 3 weeks, but they were putting a gallon onto a glass tabletop and using a wipe. Well, that's going to take time to clean it up. So until we can get more specific information, which I don't know when that will come, I think that's going to be the hardest part.
Yeah, I think that, with the temperature checks, it's comforting to our guests and our employees if, at least we can't, like you said, with HIPAA, and we can't reveal if somebody's been positive or has the antibodies. Of course, if they've been working, they won't be there until they're, back to after their quarantine. But I think that I see a lot from our guests that when we say, we're temperature checking every person that walks in the door, it's comforting to them, because that fever has been a pretty common thing that's been talked about from the beginning. But as far as everything else, it's almost like the news changes daily. So it's hard to, we've at least found some consistency with that.
Yeah, and kind of the same thing too in Chapel Hill. So, I don't think we would ever be able to guarantee that, our hotel is COVID free. I don't think any hotel or, anywhere can guarantee that anytime soon. So I think, like they were mentioning, just, always, letting people know we are checking temperatures, for all of our employees, when they see your team members going through the public spaces, making sure people have on gloves, make sure they're wearing masks. So I think it's, as long as they're still seeing that, like, hey, we're following through on what we're promising, I think, most of the guests will really appreciate that.
We have a question from the audience again. How would you handle finding out one of your customers had contracted the coronavirus while staying at your hotel?
I think that's a tough one. I think first you'd have to be able to prove that they contracted it at the hotel. I mean, it's a virus that's in the air. So unless we knew there was contact with someone who was COVID positive, but that person wouldn't be working, So hopefully that's not the case. I mean, there's definitely some protocol in place to sanitize and disinfect, EPA chemicals and things if we identify that there's been a guest. But again, it's hard to say that they would actually have contracted it at the property.
Yeah, and if guests, we did have a case in the hotel where a guest had called us right when they had left that day and said that they had just tested positive. And, we have a program in place, and I mean, every guest might not tell you like this one guest did, and you might not even know, but, in the event of a positive case of the COVID-19, we would remove the room from service. We would have a professional company come out and, shock treat with a special chemical and the magnetic treatment that they've done. And we would only return it back to service, and we would treat all of our public areas as well. We would check if they had housekeeping that day, we had the housekeeper tested that serviced the room and everything like that. So there's protocols in place in the event that it does happen, but we might not ever really know if a guest doesn't tell us.
Yeah, along the same lines. Yeah, if we ever learn anything like that, we're doing everything we can to make sure that that room's offline. We actually had a case pretty early on in August, and that person left and notified us the next day that they had tested positive. So we were able to go ahead and take that room offline for the next week. We had it professionally cleaned along with our public spaces. We went ahead and had any staff member that came in contact with that person, even if it was just for a few minutes, we had them tested as well, or asked them to take a test if they felt like they needed to. So you just got to do everything you can. It's not a perfect science at all. And then at the same time too, if a person was coming to you and saying, hey, I think I got COVID from your hotel, I think it's very similar to like if someone ate bad seafood at your hotel, you would probably notice some type of outbreak where it was more than one person, probably a group of people, people that had that same dish are most likely going to have those same symptoms that evening. So you could reach out to them and pretty much quickly identify if it was something that started at your property or not.
I had a personal question actually. Emily Clark just asked a question. We'll put her on top in front of the line. How has the situation impacted staff members from overseas, if at all?
Well, we had our whole staff used to be from overseas, our whole front office staff. And right, in March when everything started to get really bad, they were all sent home immediately, and their J1 visas were ended. They all were sent home early. So this year, since we've reopened and had none of our J1 employees, we've had just found local staff, but it was a big effect for us.
Yeah, we don't use J1s. I had a few leaders who are on visas, but other than that, we don't really, we don't use J1s or H1s for the most part, so we were impacted by that.
Yeah, and we really didn't face that issue at all either in Chapel Hill.
Okay, another audience question. Are there any new protocols you've put into place? I think we've already answered this question about protocols you guys might keep after coronavirus. Did we? Yeah, we answered a question about that, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. My personal question was about marketing. In terms of marketing, how has that affected you guys' marketing? Like, are you guys putting the new measures on marketing, or do you think that's just a given that you guys are taking these measures? Like, are you guys using that as something positive for marketing? Like, oh look, we're taking all of these we're taking all this extra care, and you guys can come here and you'll feel safe and all that stuff.
We're not doing it from a marketing perspective. We have it on our website, and we have the resources available. We communicate with the guest pre-arrival. But I think it's an expectation that you're doing those things. I don't think it's we're better than the hotel up the street because we are, because the expectation from the traveler is we're all doing it. I think the biggest marketing change is the guest is different or is coming from a different place. They're driving versus flying. So that's changing length of stay. It's changing, how far they're willing to travel, right? So our drive-in market has changed. Where we're getting our guests from has changed a little bit. So I think that's the biggest change to marketing for us.
Yeah, I agree with him. I mean, it's like if you think about when you look in your email every day and you have 100 emails from every store you've ever attended, and every single one says, our COVID operating procedures. It's more one of those things. It's like, we put it out there for our guests and for our employees and everyone, but it's not really opportunity. It's just something that part of the business operation.
Yeah, and we really just pushed that message. I think once we were reopening our hotels, just to let everybody know, especially a lot of our guests who have been, frequenting our hotels for a few years now, we put it out there like, hey, we're reopening all of our hotels, and these are the measures we're taking to make sure we, create a safe environment for you and your family when you come visit us. But, since that message went out in mid-June, we really haven't done too much marketing on, these are the preventative measures that we're taking. So.
Okay, we have a question from Elizabeth. And I am getting ready to start an internship at a Ritz-Carlton. What are the differences you are seeing in guest complaints and requests from a luxury brand standpoint?
Well,
that's an amazing question.
That's a great opportunity. I think, the luxury traveler has always been very discerning. They're willing to pay for things that they can't do on their own. And I think the biggest thing they're willing to buy is time, right? They don't want to spend time cleaning their room or going and cooking themselves. That's why they choose a luxury venue. So I think that their expectation hasn't changed. I think in the back of their minds, their level of service or cleanliness, especially cleanliness, was always at that level, although they might not have asked about it. I think the expectation was always there. I think the biggest thing is knowing that the service delivery will happen, even if it's with gloves or with a mask or dropped at their door versus an interaction, which is the biggest change. We're used to interacting with the guests, making eye contact, escorting them somewhere, as opposed to just giving them directions. So that sort of behavior is changed a little, where we're using more motion, trying to show them with our eyes that we're smiling and communicating with them more openly, I think is the biggest change. They still have a pretty high expectation of service delivery. They expect room service to be open. They expect valet service to be there. Of course, they expect it with cleaning and sanitation protocols in place, but the expectation has not changed. And in fact, most of our business in our resort or hard to get to destinations is families who are willing to buy a whole floor of a hotel to ensure that they're socially distanced from other guests.
Yeah, I'm kind of experiencing the same thing in Hilton Head and with our clientele, is that none of the expectations have changed at all. There's been a little bit of disappointment from the guests when we say that, we're not offering room service, we're not offering valet, and it's more just kind of like pushback from them regarding it. But at the same time, it's really the only time to date that you can really say there's nothing that we can do. And as long as the staff is on the same page and really just explains it in a way that gets through to the guests, it's been okay. But really just the complaints have just been really, with us, it's just a lack of services.
Yeah, same thing for us too. It's just been that initial, folks that have stayed here with us prior to our conversion to graduate. When they stayed here when it was the Franklin Hotel, people are used to having a really great cocktail option in the evening, having a really nice, really good breakfast in the morning. And those folks who came back in the fall expecting that, we just aren't able to offer that right now.
Thank y'all. I forgot to bring up the poll results. So our first question that we had earlier was, have you stayed or would you be willing to stay in a hotel or resort for vacation since COVID-19? And 72% overwhelmingly said that they have stayed or are willing to stay in a hotel or resort. I think I'm waiting on the second one, but, oh, here we go. 44% are somewhat concerned. About how concerned are you about contracting the virus while traveling? Okay. The next question is, how have you trained your staff and motivated them to maintain all the health and safety guidelines?
I think for us, it's, we do the same thing in the heart of the house that we would do in the public areas for our guests. So whether it's riding elevators with the same limitations, whether it's, lining up for the punch clock or in the employee cafeteria, none of that is any different from what we do for our guests. And I think that's the first part. The second part is nonstop communication. What's happening, why we do it, training, retraining, communicating change. We need everybody to adapt. This is a new way of life. It's the new norm, and it's not going to go away for the most part. So we need to make sure that they're trained and they can communicate every touch point that we're providing for the guest. They have to be able to explain it to the guest. Because the minute they run into a housekeeper or somebody in the hallway and they ask a question and they don't get a level of confidence in the response, we've failed, right? Because then they start to question everything else. To me, it's like being in a restaurant and you see the chef come out and his jacket's dirty or his apron is filthy. You then have an assumption that everything is like that. So if they run into one lady or gentleman who gives them an answer that they don't feel confident in, it's just going to spiral out of control. So I think that's the biggest change.
Yeah, and with our staff, it's really it's just not an option in these times. It's not an option at work. It's not an option in home, school, anywhere you go. So it's just, you have no choice but to subscribe to it, because, otherwise you're just it will be miserable being at work if you're not, if you don't wear a mask and you have to answer for it from the guests, and you wouldn't be meeting the expectations. So we really haven't had any issues with it. It's just one of those things that naturally happen, just adapting to the new normal.
Yeah, and I think, once we rolled out, kind of our game plan and trained our staff, and I think everybody was initially taking it seriously. And then we actually had one of our team members actually come down with COVID. We ended up finding out he got it from a funeral that he attended earlier in the week. But, it kind of put everybody on high alert that, like, this is very real. This is not just something you're watching on television right now. So I think, once we all kind of felt that initial shock, and it's like, okay, yeah, we really have to make sure we're paying attention to these steps we're taking to make sure these rooms are clean, that we're, checking each other's temperatures every day. We're following the procedures. We're not skipping steps. We're not saying, oh, well, I feel okay, so, no big deal. We're taking our time, making sure that we're doing it the right way, instead of just, saying, oh, well, I don't need to wear gloves when I go, switch out the laundry or do any of that. It's like, no, put your gloves on. Let's make sure we're doing this the right way. So I think it took that initial shock, I think, to wake everybody up, but we've been doing a good job of following those procedures since. So.
Thank you. Just a question I thought of, because I'm curious, how often does the staff get COVID tested?
We don't do any testing
Okay.
ourselves. We follow any protocol that's Mecklenburg Health Department would send out. So if they were to identify someone who would come in contact, we would follow their lead. We take temperatures on arrival each day to make sure that and ask about symptoms, but that's it.
Sorry, Julie, go ahead.
Okay, we follow the same protocol as well.
Yep. Yeah, we're just doing temperature checks, and we have a questionnaire that our team has to answer every day. So you actually have to have one of the team leaders that's working that morning or that evening come through and conduct a brief interview or run through the questionnaire with you, check your temperature before you can actually go out to the floor.
Thank you.
Awesome. I have a question that I thought of as well. Do you think you guys will lose guests to the home share market, being that they would be less likely to be in contact with other people, and people might assume that it's safer Do you guys think that that's a true concern you guys have at the moment?
I think from a business travel perspective, we'll have to travel again. Some business will need to be conducted face to face. I think nobody wants to be the first company to let everybody travel again, and then someone gets sick or it blows out of control with the number of people from the same company getting sick. So I think that's the biggest reluctance right now. We all work in hospitality. So if our company, if my regional team or the corporate team isn't willing to travel, what message does that send to the guests, right? We're asking them to travel. We've come up with some packages where the guests can use the hotel room as an office for the day, which includes internet and some other perks as opposed to being trapped in their home. But I think business travel, consultants, those roles will take a bit longer, but eventually some of the travel will have to happen again. I think where we may see a reduction is in office towers, where people are not commuting into the cities as much. But I think from a travel perspective, we'll see that gain traction because business needs to happen face to face in some instances.
And, at our resort, we have a whole separate lodging section with home and villa rentals and property management. And as I said before, we've blown away occupancy just because of the location and people doing virtual school and working from home and wanting to be outside. But our home and villa section has been doubled as far as occupancy. The main season used to be Memorial Day to Labor Day. And as of right now, we're busy through December, over 60 to 80%. So, home share is definitely a good industry to have right now, for, what's happening everywhere. But our hotel has still had a lot of occupancy, and it's not really because that's an option. It's just, both industries are busy just in our area.
Yeah, and I think it does go back, the bigger picture is that consumer confidence. So there are people that I'm sure we all know that will only stay at Hilton properties. They will only stay at, Marriott properties. It's because they built that trust with that brand. So when each of these brands or each of these companies is putting out their plan for how they're handling COVID or taking those precautions to make sure that you have a stay that, is a little maybe safer than what you would get if you were renting somebody's apartment down by the beach or condo or anything like that. So I think, it just, as long as those companies continue to follow up and on that promise that they're making to those guests, I don't see those travelers, leaving those brands, those trusted brands and going more toward those home share opportunities.
For sure. Very interesting. Thank you. Rylan has a question. How have you handled situations where guests didn't want to follow protocol that have been put in place due to COVID-19?
So I think, it happens, and I don't think, I think social media definitely flies past our site as we think about interactions with guests, because if you watch Home Depot or Costco and you watch all these people who, make a scene or it just ends up escalating the situation, we try to explain calmly and factually, wearing a mask or what's required. There's some pretty strict rules in North Carolina still, especially with weddings. There's no dance floors, there's no mingling, there's no happy hours, social hours. So you have someone who gets married, you pretty much get married, you sit down, you have dinner, you leave, right? Which isn't what most people anticipate. We try to get on the forefront of it all and share as much information pre-arrival or pre-event so that there is no confusion. I'd rather have an event cancel knowing what the limitations are versus get into a situation where we have to have that dialogue around what the rules are. Nobody likes to enforce the rules, but when public health is at issue, then I think it's a little easier for most people to swallow.
Yeah, our biggest thing we've run into is the masks. We get a lot of people that don't want to put their mask on in the public area. And, we just kindly explain it's the law. It's not me. It's not the resort. It's the law. And we have to follow the law, and it's the safety of other guests and our employees. And that's the most important thing.
Yeah, the same thing. It's been the mask, right? Everybody is super familiar with all of those policies everywhere you go, or those videos like you watch on YouTube that people just having those meltdowns, and Costco, it's just hasn't been good, right? So we don't want any of those situations happening at our hotel. We've been in a situation where we've had all these students that have been staying with us for the last couple months now. And so we just created a list of community standards that we've asked all of our students that are staying with us to kind of uphold. And it's really funny, like you see them kind of hold each other accountable, like limiting how many people are getting on the elevator at one time. They're all very patient with each other. And, that stuff's good to see. And you even see some of our older guests who are staying with us kind of watching these students, and they come in and they kind of follow along with what the students are doing. So it's actually been working out pretty well. We haven't had any, crazy incident just yet. So.
Thank you. So the other polling question was, what might inhibit you the most from staying at a hotel or resort during COVID? And 55% of the audience said that they're inhibited by sharing space with other guests, but 25% do not feel inhibited at all. And Bia, there's a question in the chat.
Yes, I saw that. I wanted to make sure I wasn't interrupting anybody before I asked. Let's see. Cameron asks, if the pandemic were to get worse, would you close your hotels or would you have stricter protocols?
It's a loaded question. There's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes, and closing a hotel comes with some significant expense and some carrying costs monthly as well that aren't always thought about. So I think that would be one of the measures, is how many people are still traveling. We've seen hotels in the big cities, New York and such, who opened up to first responders or emergency room physicians from other cities. We see it just like Wes is doing with students, so housing for universities. So I think it really depends on what's happening. There's always talk that it could get worse. Owners are pretty sensitive. They're no different than us, who are trying to, they have a mortgage or a land lease or other things that need to happen. And sometimes a little bit of revenue is better than no revenue. The carrying costs and the cost to service debt can be astronomical. So sometimes pennies make a difference. So that would really depend on partially owners and how much business is still happening. I don't think Hilton Head or some of these beach properties would have assumed that they would be seeing the volume they're seeing now, right? So I think some of it's so unpredictable that could change tomorrow.
Yeah, and I completely agree. It's just so hard to say. And I mean, we did close at one point, but I don't see that happening again. Like you said, we can utilize the open hotel for a lot of other things, just other than tourism. So that I don't have an answer for.
Yeah, and our company too, I mean, they closed the entire portfolio down, like I said, back in March. And, they just, as a company, made a commitment to reopening in June and slowly reopening all their hotels. A couple of our hotels, even on the West Coast, have not officially reopened yet. So they've just been watching each individual market. And then even as we're opening with, a fraction of the teams we had before. Back in March, I had a staff of 48 people. I currently only have a team of 14. So, it's a different industry right now. And no one can say, well, I don't do housekeeping, or I don't do front desk, or I'm the GM, I don't make beds. I can promise you, GMs still make beds. They clean bathrooms. It's just part of the deal where we're all pitching in right now. So I see that kind of being more of the thing over the next several months, is that all of these owners, all of the businesses, they're going to be keeping their team smaller and have folks on there that are adaptable and resilient. So you'll see teams that are a lot smaller that are able to get the job done, at least for the next several months, until things start returning back to normal.
We have a picture, we have a question from Dr. K, Dr. Kubickova. How long do you think it'll take before hotels are back to regular operations?
Another loaded question. I think some hotels are back at normal operation from a business perspective. I think it depends on the market and what's happening. City hotels versus resort versus mountain versus convention. I think all those hotels are going to go through a different timeline from recovery. I think Wes spoke to it when he mentioned, it's your housekeeper is also maybe checking in a guest or parking your car. I think what we've done over the last 6 or 7 months is everything, right? From checking a guest in to make sure that protocols are being done, to inspecting guest rooms, to replenishing honor bar. I don't think there's any rule that we haven't done because we've had no choice, right? And even we never closed, but we had things that had to happen every day, running water in every guest room. So those things still had to happen, and the team was 3 or 4, and it got done. So I think having flexibility, but the normal, whatever normal ends up being, I think, for me is going to be probably by the end of 21 before I see business travel. I think transient will still exist, but until there's concerts and basketball games and football games, those are the types of things that also drive, room nights. And until we see some of those, I don't think normal will exist.
Yeah, and I completely agree with all of it. And I think too, that business won't get back to normal until there's a vaccine or something, out there that none of us have answers to, which is, we all want it to be normal tomorrow, but we just don't know.
Yeah, it's probably one of the most amusing things I've been a part of has been trying to plan our budget for 2021. I'm sure you all are going through that as well. As like, oh, well, what will it look like in Q3 or Q4? So, for us, like, we're hoping that, by the time the university is coming back in the fall of 21, that some of that business is picking back up, that those football games are, back. Maybe it may not even be at 100% capacity at that point, but even if it's at 50% or 75%, like that would greatly impact our economy here in Chapel Hill, and definitely for us in the hospitality industry. So we're hoping that's where things start turning around a little bit. But once again, like Julie mentioned, until there's a vaccine, until there's that consumer confidence, even just all the reviews that are posted online, right? So if like people are looking at it and there's several months of continuous reviews of what these hotels are doing to take extra steps to make their hotels safer for guests, like that kind of positive reinforcement will continue to build that consumer confidence, and hopefully this time next year that we're seeing our way out of this.
Yeah, and the hardest part is doing things that we're not used to. From a luxury perspective, we would never clean something in front of a guest. You would never see us with a mop or a cloth and a sanitizing spray. That was unheard of. You would wait till there was nobody around. You would clean it and move on. Now the guests want to see you wiping down the elevator buttons. They want to see the door handles wiped down. They want to see the public areas sprayed. There's no hesitation. When they see it, they feel better. And hand sanitizer stations everywhere. Welcome pack in their room with gloves and a mask and hand sanitizer. That would never have been considered luxury, but we've had to adapt because they want to see it. They feel more confident when they see the action happening in front of them.
Thank you. One final question that we have for you guys. How do you think this pandemic will affect the rising seniors as they begin to search for jobs in the industry?
I think Wes mentioned flexibility and adaptability is going to be key. Even from operations roles, we're not going to be looking at specific food and beverage or rooms operations or housekeeping. We're going to be looking for operational leaders who are willing to flex and do anything that's needed at the time, which, most of us, I can speak for myself, more likely is that we've grown up through one part of the business, which it can be meetings and special events, or it could be rooms, or it could be F&B. We're going to be expecting young leaders to be able to and want to do it all, because that's what leadership's going to look like. Teams are smaller, from an hourly perspective, you go from a 200, person team or a 500 person team to 20% or 30% or 40% less. The job still has to happen, right? We still have to deliver service. And from a leadership perspective, you might be the only manager on tonight and you're watching the bar because now you only have one food and beverage operation open, or you're watching housekeeping because someone else is off. So I think flexibility and adaptability are going to be two strengths that you'll need to be successful in landing a role.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't have said it better. For a long time, millennials kind of got this stigma with them because it's like, you graduate college and you expect a parking space with your name and, a 9-to-5 work schedule. And, that didn't even happen already in hospitality, but now it's like you need to just be completely open-minded and ready to do anything that's thrown at your way when it comes to operations. I mean, like Wes said, and, the us general managers, we're making bed, bartending. I mean, the inn is so small where I'm checking a guest in, and they're like, oh, I'm gonna go get a drink, and I run behind the back hall and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm your bartender too. And it's kind of fun, but it's not how it used to be. And anyone getting into this industry now is they're gonna have to be open to that and knowing that that's what it is. And it's a lot different than it was before with the smaller teams and, in a 24-hour industry. So a lot more hours, longer days, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I completely agree with both of you. I mean, I know, there are some things I learned there while I was at South Carolina. Dr. Brown, who I think is on this call right now, he was one of my mentors there. And, one of the things he said coming out of school, you got to be willing to go where other people may not want to work. So you may initially say, oh, I want to go work down in New York City and work at the W down in Times Square. Well, you might end up at the Hilton Garden Inn that has 300 rooms in Idaho. Like if you can take a position there, go there for 2 years, get that experience. And then, that position over in New York will be ready for you in a couple of years. But, just be open to, maybe going somewhere you may not have thought about before, because those positions are probably going to be more readily available than some of these other ones that people are going to try to snatch up in these metro areas. And then I would also say too, what are you doing right now to better prepare yourself for, what these environments are going to be like when you go to work there? What are you doing now to make yourself more resilient? What are you doing now to better educate yourself on leadership? You're going to be probably put into a position where even if it's to start with, you might only have 1 or 2 people that you might be supervising, but it's going to be really important that you're training those people to do the right thing. And, there's going to be a lot of weight on your shoulders very early on. So you got to be able to kind of step right in and be able to handle that.
And I think the pride is taking care of our guests, right? No matter what has to happen. If you're not willing to take care of the guests, then we're not in the right profession. And lately, with the pandemic, it's really taught others that, especially millennials, they've had this stigma, like Julie mentioned, is things are changing, right? It's not about being a GM. It's not about a fancy office and not having to worry about things and going home at 5 o'clock. You're in operations, and operations has to happen. So if I spend 3 hours behind the front desk answering the phone to take pressure off, then that's what we got to do to make it happen. And I think we just got to be aware and open to those things because they're going to happen more so than ever. I mean, I grew up in operations and I love being in the thick of it. And sometimes that's hard, right? Because we used to be in a role where we would, now you got to step back and look at big picture and do things, which we still have to do. But the little things, the phone still has to be answered, right? And we've increased mobility so our guests can chat. When you're texting back and forth with a friend and you see the bubble, they're responding. The guest is the same way, right? So sometimes their mode of communication or delivery has changed, but the expectation has not. They want a response. That mobile chat is just as important as the phone ringing. So it's how do we get our team ready to do that and then deliver the experience?
Yeah, just to add one more thing too, I know there are a lot of folks who like the idea of jumping right into sales as well. So I know that's been one of the departments at a lot of the hotels that it's still struggling to come back, just because if you were thinking about, well, I want to be a catering sales manager straight out of college, well, right now no one's booking anything, right? No one's booking these large group events, at least not for this year. So it's just thinking about where you can get in. So if that's an assistant manager for housekeeping for 6 months, it's like, great, go ahead and apply for that job, step up and take that opportunity. And then as soon as something opens up in the sales department there at that hotel, jump right in there.
I think we're waiting on results for our last poll question. But our last poll question was, what would incentivize you the most to stay at a hotel or resort since COVID-19? The discounts, safety protocols, destination within driving distance, or none? Okay. Safety protocols is what won, and then discounts was second. Okay. Okay, here's another question. What advice do you have for those in the lodging industry that are furloughed or have lost their positions due to COVID? Are there any skills they might need because of COVID?
I don't know about skills, but I think again, it all comes down to that flexibility and adaptability. I know as, teams of my colleagues that have been called back from furlough, they're selecting those who are offer the greatest flexibility. There's not a lot of room for, if you had 50 managers before and you have room for 40, those 40 got to be able to do everything that those 50 could do. So I think, being flexible, it might not be the norm. You might be used to being in housekeeping, but coming back knowing that you're going to help in F&B or on the front drive or in guest service or wherever, I think is going to be the biggest thing that they can do, is be open to flexibility and sharing that information.
Yeah, and I think too, if you're going to pick 40 out of 50 managers, you're going to pick the 40 that are willing, that that are going to show up to work and say, I'll clean a room today if that's what you need me to do, because there's going to be 10 of those people that are like, oh, well, I'm not doing that, that's not my job. And nowadays, I mean, hospitality, even before COVID, you really needed to have kind of that attitude, like, I can cross train and do whatever you need me to do. But now even more, like, you're not going to get that call back if you're not willing to, kind of get in the throes of the operation when you're used to sitting at your desk and, not having to face a guest or clean something or bus a table or, drive a shuttle, anything like that.
Yeah, that adaptability is super important. And then probably too, don't expect to make the same amount of money you were making prior to COVID if you're trying to find a way to get back in the industry. I've got several friends who were in sales and, doing really well as either directors of sales or managers of sale, or sales managers. And now they're coming back and they're helping, do, nighttime supervisor for the front desk. And everybody hopes that it's a temporary thing, but if you're passionate about the industry, I would urge people to stick it out, maybe take a role that, like I said, may not pay as much initially, but it gets you back in the door. And as soon as those opportunities, open back up, you'll be right there waiting. So.
Thank you so much for your answers to all these questions that we have. Thank you to Julie, John, and Wes for sharing your knowledge and the experience with those that join us for this forum. I know we do have a lot of students on this forum as well. I want to thank them as well, and I hope they have gained some of the knowledge to go back into the industry after they graduate. I would like to just point out that we have a great restaurant and lodging association here at University of South Carolina. It's a brand new association, and Chaselin as a president and Bia as a secretary have represented this association here. So if you would like to join them in doing some exciting stuff that centers around restaurants and hotels, please reach out to them. I want to thank Chaselin and Bia for moderating this session. And please do not forget to join us on Tuesday, November 10th at 4 p.m. for our next forum for the centering around events industry. So thank you again, everybody, for participating and joining us today.
Thank you so much. And again, if any of you are interested in joining the Restaurant and Lodging Association, my name is Bia. We have an Instagram. It's let me check the @ it's at RLA UofSC. I will be putting it down in the chat. And I put my email as well. If you wanted more information, you can DM us or you can send me an email and I'd be happy to reply.
Yes, I have my email down there as well.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for your time, guys. It's really nice to meet you guys and hear from you guys as general managers about this really interesting topic. So really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.